Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked about what we're looking forward to for the year and what we hope to cover on the show. Listeners, let us know what else you want to hear. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. Yeah, we're skipping announcements for this segment just to say Happy New Year, everyone, and Happy New Year, Akira. We'll see you next episode. So, John, we just talked about what we wanted to cover and what we're looking forward to covering for the year. Now let's see exactly how that's going to turn out in practice. The first thing I have is I apologize, listeners, and I apologize to you personally, John, that you were so constructive, positive in the last segment that this might erase all of that. 23andMe has decided to shift left, shift right, or shift all of the blame about not necessarily a breach, we would say, but about the account takeovers to users with poor password practices. And wow, I think I've got some things to say about this, but you always have fun after a long sigh like that. So maybe we should turn it over to you.
I honestly don't have much on this one. It's
okay.
Come on, guys. It's so when this first came out, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, I don't know if I said on air, but my thought was, I had at one point respect for the security team at 23andMe. I don't know who's still there. They used to have some really great folks. And it's sort of, so my point being, I know they put a pretty good amount of effort into securing that data because they knew if anyone, that's one of the companies out there we really don't want to get compromised. At the same time, I never used that product for a reason. So, right, it's like there's I think it comes back in a way. I mean, talking about what we talked about the last segment for, I'm just completely ignoring the shift left on the blame because that's dumb. The great quote though, but the thinking from a point of view around this whole AppSec thing in humans that I was talking about in the last half, this is a great example of it, right? It's it really comes down. I mean, I'm trying to work out my 3 words, but like really for AppSec in a way, it is how much are you willing to spend to secure whatever it is, and this is sort of they spend a pretty good amount. Obviously not enough, or maybe they stopped spending, or I'm not sure how that went down, but yeah, don't blame your users. That's just the thing is,
yeah.
It's going on my let's look back in 6 months. Is because I don't think it's going to really affect the company or stock or things like that. I think that that's not just a jaded side of me. I think that's just what we're going to see. It'll be perfectly fine.
Yeah, 3 words might be what's the cost, perhaps, is what you're looking for there. But I think, too, the thing I wanted to highlight about this, too, is that, one, let's not blame the users, but 2, I can understand perhaps the frustration on their side about this wasn't a breach. And maybe I don't want to get into the pedantics of a breach versus not a breach, but more of, well, users should know that they should have better password practices and not recycle, was their word, passwords that have been compromised. But one of the angles I wanted to take there is that who's better positioned to enforce and help the users? One of CIS's tenets around secure by design is taking ownership of security outcomes for users. In this case, a service like Have I Been Pwned is actually really awesome for companies to say, can we go through and see, from Have I Been Pwned, have any of our users match up, those email addresses with past compromises? Or do any of the passwords that people are using match a known cracked password that's been compromised? And that's a great way to say, dear user, by the way, please choose, and we're going to forbid you from choosing that password, or please rotate your password, or please, we are going to require MFA. I think there's a lot of ways that a company itself, like 23andMe or others, are best positioned to take that ownership rather than rely on you, me, everybody else to figure out what of the dozen or so websites may have compromised and exposed our credentials.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting there. I don't know how you do this. I know how they're trying to do it. So part of the thought there around that is like, even we're seeing Apple is trying to do this, right? Like I'll occasionally get flags of some password I haven't used for 5 years. It's like, Oh, that was a default password. You can have that. But like the point there is sort of what you're saying with have I been pwned? That technology, and I'm not sure if it's being licensed or not, but we're starting to see in more and more locations. I don't like using the commercial password safes personally, my own little thing. And part of that, but the counter to that is if I'm using something like that, I'm able to leverage that capability to see when something happens. So is there an in between? Is there like someplace I can like upload all my hashes, or I don't know how you do that. But and to bring it back again to like what do our listeners do with this is like, okay, well, if you're, I think to me it comes down to, at least in this one, it's like if you're building that product, beside the fact of knowing if you've been compromised, how do you inform your users, or inform your users, like as you were saying, that their passwords are weak without doing that stupid password strength meter type thing.
Yes.
If you're an organization with, say, 1 million accounts, would you pay to have access to have I been pwned to inform your customers, your users, that the password that they're using on your site has been compromised? I bet there's a legal angle there where legal would go, oh my God, hell no. But I think it's sort of an interesting thing to think about. In other words, can we flip this around, and can we have those companies actually try to somehow help instead of be a sink?
And I know for a fact that those services are available, and I think that is something that this is where I would love to see an OWASP or an OpenSSF type of, not a list, but a project that, or document like that, it describes, here are, and I'm trying to avoid the use best practices, but here are designs for authentication, meaning here's authentication implementations. Here is how you do, here are recommendations around account recovery. Here is a threat model, perhaps, is what I'm getting around account recovery, rotating, and why moving users from credentials to passkeys to something like that. So that's where I'm using this 23andMe to hopefully plant some seeds to talk about better ways just for any organization out there to manage credentials. We've got a bunch of other articles too, John, so I don't want to maybe spend too much time on that one just off the bat, even though it's great to have a conversation like this. I did want to remind you, and this was, or want to update you and our listeners on the Polish hackers who were hacking the DRM that was killing a train's power arbitrarily, apparently. Now, there's an update here from 404 Media, a new article, as well as I linked to their video, their presentation from the Chaos Computer Club, where they talk about their work. It gets pretty technical, pretty detailed, but I think a lot of our listeners might appreciate that. And it's just kind of an interesting area that I don't think either of us have had a chance to go into too much of a deep dive on, but something that I think might be an interesting underlying theme in the sense of, I'll call it hacking for good, but more in the sense of DRM, or the misuse or abuse of security that is anti-user. Much like sort of the other extreme of taking ownership of security outcomes for users. This is preventing any outcome for users, if you will, in the sense of trying to fix a train. I'm not sure if that made sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
That's what I'm going with.
It's an interesting. I'm not faulting us for covering this, but it's interesting from 2 points. There's like what the guys did in the first place that sort of found this and how they were engaged. Then there's the things actually breaking, but what's actually going on in between. It's not really an AppSec thing, but still from the point of view of like, to our listeners, of like, please try to get your companies not to do this. It's sort of the sphere around AppSec, I guess, in a way. But like, it's interesting to see what they're doing, and they're actually capturing some of the CAN bus on it. That's really neat. This does look like a fun article. But yeah, end of day, it's are we going to see more of this? I'm betting yes. I mean, as we're starting to see like consumer automobiles with subscription services in them. I mean,
your seat heaters in your BMW. Exactly.
Yeah, and that there's something in my car that I know in there I could subscribe to, and like I don't care enough. But like it's, but where I'm going with this is the fact that you're able to do that. That's showing that there's a remote connection into that CAN bus system. Back to my previous comment about input standardization, I'm willing to bet that they're not doing any type of filtering on that. And if you just happen to know the right way to do it, you could probably disable other things over that CAN bus. And now if you're thinking about that on a consumer automotive state, is there some way to tell a car, hey, remember that subscription you have about your power brakes? We want to cancel that. What happens then? So it's things like that, which again, the AppSec point of it, I'm probably beating too much on a dead horse in that one, but yeah, it's curious to see what they find out next on this. Is for folks who haven't figured out, we really like C3, and one of these years I'm going to this conference in person, but.
Indeed. And it stands for Chaos Communication Conference. This is where I get some things stuck in my head and I maybe misspeak. But before you send us emails about that, I'll correct it. But John, you grabbed another article from the conference. What is this about?
Yeah, I've got two. I'm going to go to the juicy one. So this, I've read a good amount on this, and this is one of those articles that I think I could keep reading for days and days and days, and I'm just going to keep being shocked. I was trying to describe to my wife on when this came out on the 27th, like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And she's like, yes, dear. So Kaspersky did this talk at C3 on, I should say the full name is it's not 27th C3. This is 37th C3.
37th.
It's been a while. 37th C3, the 37th occurrence of this awesome conference. Anyways, they did this talk about something called Operation Triangulation, which was it is not known, but I'll say it probably a nation state level attack on iOS devices. So as part of, this is something they've been tracking over multiple years. I think they first saw it, I want to say 2020, 2021. It's really been going on for a while. It was patched in iOS 16.2. But for this attack, it is literally an attack chain. It used 4 0 days. One of which, the most interesting to me, so it went through and the level of detail on here is like, it'd be interesting to see or to think about what's going on here. So they come in through a malicious iMessage attachment, easy for me to say. So that's your first O day. Then they're able to, from that, to do a remote code execution and get down into the phone. At that point, they actually partially clean up after themselves and then go download a payload for another attack, which they've already got remote code execution. So it wasn't clear to me why they're doing that pivot to then go in and then hack the phone again, but they're doing that. If certain things about the phone are right, it's in the right location and all that sort of thing these guys like to do nowadays. Keeps going. They've got an integer overflow vulnerability. Keep going. They then found a hardware memory mapped IO vulnerability. And let's see, which one is the interesting one here? One of these, and there's a graphic for the chain on it really sort of drives home on the link we've got. This is, it's a multi-stage attack. In my mind, this is the craziest thing I've seen since the attacks we had against the nuclear centrifuges in Iraq. Was that a decade ago, Mike? It was a few years ago. So this is sort of like on that level of craziness. But the interesting part is one of these, and as I said, there's so much cover here. I should have made notes on this article. I didn't. My apologies. But one of these 4 O days was actually using a undocumented API in iOS. So the question becomes, how did they figure out how to call this thing that no one knew existed in a encrypted operating system? And they leave it at that. I've seen some other articles since then say that there's a possibility that the manufacturer of that phone might have actually helped, which really doesn't seem like Apple style. But it's a really good read. This is long, but it's one of those, like, as you keep going on it, you're like, oh, wow, impressive, impressive, impressive. And it keeps going. So we are time limited, so I'm going to shut up for now. But I think this is one that, we could possibly dig into further in a future episode and just like spend time on just this one, or leave it to our listeners. So if you guys are interested, do let us know, and we'll happily come back and go further.
Let us know, because there's aspects here of the sandboxing of the iPhone's design of blast doors, things that are, where their design is intended to limit the impact of any of these single vulns, perhaps. But as John was noted, it's quite an attack chain of them. And interesting, I think the complexity also perhaps does imply or point to the amount of effort that Apple has put in on securing the code. When an attack does need to be complex. So it's that concept of raising the attacker's cost is one of the things that AppSec folks want to try to do in their designs. I don't know that I would necessarily go down to the conspiracy theory of, well, maybe the hardware vendor helped them. And I know that's where you weren't going either, because I also have an article about an undocumented endpoint related to OAuth handling and cookies that some malware authors were exploiting to basically do some session hijacking or create some eternal access, if you will, persistent access to compromised OAuth accounts or compromised Google accounts. And in this case, it boiled down to what's called a MultiLogin endpoint that essentially Google relied on for their Gaia mechanism that keeps sessions in sync across different browsers, different devices. And essentially what what this article points out is how the malware authors leveraged this to mint OAuth cookie, mint OAuth access to impersonate a user and then maintain that impersonation, as well as bypassing things like, this cookie is being minted again from the same IP address that originally was there, because the malware authors were going through a SOX proxy to minimize the type of fraud detection that Google will be implementing here. I think so. I wanted to highlight some of the technical details, not quite as in depth or wild as the one John highlighted, which is a great read. But another part of me wanted to point out this in the sense of, if you reset your password, that doesn't necessarily mean you're revoking all of your OAuth grants. And so one of the questions is, at what point do you or should you revoke OAuth grants, either as a user, because you know your password's been compromised and you want to rotate it and rotate all of the access to your account, or when do you as the product owner, the app owner, do that on behalf of users because you think that a password rotation is because of a compromise, or there is this type of detection. And that is, I think, something that's universal for anybody handling logins. It has to be, that doesn't have a very single answer.
And I think
there's definitely some usability there.
Thinking about this on a maturity model curve also, for some of the younger companies or products or tools out there, do you have the ability to either force a reset for all your users? Like right now, if your boss comes to you in 5 minutes, say, we've got a problem, we have to reset everyone's passwords. Can you do that in 30 seconds? And then the second part of that is, if your boss comes to you and says, hey, looks like we're seeing something come out of, I don't know, pick a country, let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to not pick on anybody. Korea, I'll let you guess, north or south. If your boss comes and says, hey, there's a problem coming from that part of the world, can we either do password reset on all those particular group of users, or maybe the users who registered in the last 15 days? Or, think about how much flexibility do you want there on that tool, or do you have that already, or how do you do that? Is that something that's going to require a bit of like the SQL click typey, or do you have a tool that can actually go and let you do that? The other interesting part on that article to me, Mike, was actually up top, the timeline of events. And I think this is interesting to show management. It's the modern part of the modern day version of why would anybody want to attack me? I'm just a lemonade stand. But the concept of many people have covered, like, if you spin up something on the cloud or on the internet, whatever else, how quickly it's compromised. But here, the timeline of events showing from the 17th through the 26th, multiple different individual malware actors decided that this was a pretty good way to use this, to leverage this vulnerability and actually start adding it to their tool. These guys have their own, I don't know if they have their own podcast, that'd be sort of neat, but they definitely have their own chat rooms. And like, once some of these ideas get out, if they're not like that secret O-Day type thing, they're happy to share them amongst their friends and, hey, look at this one. So thinking that your vulnerability surface is small might not actually be that accurate.
Yeah, that is funny, and I think even there was a theme of that security through obscurity is neither, right? That's the pithy response to throw out there, and I think that was a theme of one of the other articles that you pulled in as well.
Yeah, and this is again more 27C3 from Hackaday. There's an individual out there, and there's a video associated with this. I haven't looked at it, but the very sort of how will I say, tight concept that I want to get across to folks. So Apple's getting rid of Lightning, the Lightning adapter, Lightning cable, moving to USB-C for reasons. There's been a lot of work that's been done over time to, how would I say, discover vulnerabilities in Lightning to allow you to allow someone to access a device either for good reasons or bad, or bypassing some security issues, or there's lots of different ways out there this stuff is used. Anyways, if Thunderbolt goes away, that means all those vulnerabilities are now sort of, you've gotten rid of that class of vulnerability, right, Mike? That's something that's very core and dear to your heart, being able to remove a whole class of vulnerability, just unplug it. Unfortunately, in this case, they plugged in something else, which would be a USB-C cable. And at least one person out there has gone and said, okay, well, what can I do with that? And look to see, can he sort of port some of his existing vulnerabilities over to that new device, being able to get JTAG over it and things like that. And the short answer is yes. And he's, he goes through sort of talking about some different things they've seen, how he's able to use power delivery signals, USB-C power delivery, that version of USB-C, one of 10 or 15, but using that and able to send signals over that to manipulate the Apple device. But really bringing it back beside the neat stuff in there and what he's doing was just that concept of, at least to me, you can't just always take out one thing and put something else in and consider it secure. It's like, okay, well, now I've got that new thing. You have to go back and start to the beginning and re-go through that whole threat model again. It's like, okay, well, we used to have this way to protect against this. Does that exist in this new thing? Or what do we do with that? So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and a great idea of when do you revisit threat models? Threat models are dynamic, and they're not like that's, I think, one of those other themes that I wanted to pick apart or pick on this year is figuring out, rather than just say, just go threat model. I don't think that's very helpful or instructive to people. Is figuring out, when do you threat model? How much time do you spend? What do you threat model? And that's a great example of revisiting, because an underlying technology is changing. It's also going to be unavoidable that this year we talk about artificial intelligence, and I have a group of articles. But before we do that, let's talk about one more thing about technical debt, or maybe using synonyms thereof. Talking about technical debt without talking about technical debt, it's a business risk, is what this article is saying. Help me out.
Yeah, sure. I stole this one from, I'm pulling, as I said off air, I'm pulling it, Matt Alderman, our old co-host, who does a little more on the business side. Excuse me. Oh my God. So article from CIO, which their core idea in here is, hey, if you've got technical debt in your app, which we know the chance of getting rid of that is very small, but if you want to try and get resources for that, you need to reformat and tell that story to the rest of the business in a way that says, hey, this is a risk to the business. And part of what I wanted to do here is bring this back and sort of say, hey, if you've got an AppSec issue, which I think in many cases people more directly understand as a risk to the business, but still, maybe you are that, as I was saying earlier, I'm from AppSec, I'm here to help. Maybe you have to sort of respin that to the development team by, as we address this application security thing, your application is going to become faster or more dynamic or more flexible or re-architected or what have you. And really what you're doing in a way here, as I step back, is that that concept of being able to emote, right? Mike, being able to, how do you understand where the other person's coming from and reframe your story in a way that, what you're doing is important, you're going to get it done, but you're telling them in a way that they actually care about. So I think that's really the sort of core thing at the end of the day there. We'll probably revisit that message every, 3 or 4 months.
I think so. And I think maybe that's one of our things too for speaking about like how to talk about this year is rather than just saying, well, it would be more secure this way. Perhaps that reframing also needs to be, this is a software quality issue, or there's some value that we're going to deliver, or here is some value to end users. We're going to make something easier, better. I think those are all probably smarter ways than just trying to fall back on, honestly, what perhaps might be lazy as this is the secure way to do things. So that's kind of my reaction as I hear that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, want to roll forward real quick because I do want to talk about some AI. And it's not going to go away, but one of the articles was AI being used for OSINT, so open source intelligence gathering. Basically, some researchers turned there at Stanford, some grad students at Stanford submitted their AI into the GeoGuessr competition. So their AI was working alongside or competing alongside is probably the better way to phrase that, humans who would basically take a picture and then try to figure out what country is this picture from, or what even more specific location is this picture from. And I highlighted this because it made me think that here is a use of AI that it was actually, ranking very highly in competitive. So it was being very effective at saying this picture is in choose your country. And that's not necessarily something that couldn't have been done before. Obviously, humans had competitions to do this, and made me think similarly. Like AI doesn't suddenly create spam as a problem or phishing as a problem, but spam and phishing in particular have pretty strong countermeasures. I want to say, like phishing, MFA, FIDO keys. These are the ways that we should be moving towards to counter phishing, regardless if AI is involved in it or not, rather than reminding, hey, John, pay attention to typos in an email, or make sure to inspect this domain name. But when we talk about images, I don't know that we as an industry, we as a group have similar type of foundational countermeasures for how this type of, I'll say threat rather than attack, perhaps is scaling. So that's why it kind of stood out to me.
There's I don't want to call them counterattacks. There's countermeasures, but they're used in very specific ways, right? So you'll see people either with masks or face paints or hats or things like that to be able to somehow trick the AI into not making that recognition, not being able to complete that puzzle piece. What was interesting about this to me is so a few things. Quick side. So first, I'm not sure how familiar people are with GeoGuessr. I've known about it for a few years. It's really great for an ice-breaking type thing in your teams. But for those who want, once you're done listening to us, head over to YouTube and look for the GeoGuessr World Championships. Those things are amazing. Like, so the core of what GeoGuessr is like this app or game will show a Google, what do they call it? Street view from somewhere in the world. And it comes down to, out of you or 2 or 3 or 4, how many people who can figure out fastest where that thing is without looking at the map. It's pretty incredible what people are able to do. But yeah, that's a perfect example for an AI, right? Because you're doing something on a scale which most of us humans couldn't even come close to thinking about. So that's what's going on behind it. But yeah, with what I just said there, I think that's where these things are going to be best. And bringing it back to spelling or what are we doing again? Application security, things like this. Whereas you've got 10 million lines of code. You can't actually go through and find out each one what's going to be perfect. But if this thing can get you down from the area of you've got 10 million lines of code, we don't know what's going on, but here's 50 that you might want to look at because we think this is in this quote unquote country, right? Same sort of idea. I think that's where they become sort of useful. So I think that's my tie back. But it is a neat thing to waste time on.
And it is a great setup because I also pulled in an article from OpenSSF about the behind the scenes of the AI Cyber Challenge. And there's 2 reasons bringing this up. One, there is a call for comments about the scoring algorithm. And but you've only got a week left up till January 15th. But if you're curious about both how the scoring algorithm is intended to work, as well as suggestions on how to make sure that the scoring algorithm represents not a gamification of the scoring itself, but actually reflecting the utility, the usefulness of AI to find and fix vulnerabilities in code, then that may appeal to you. And John, the other reason I brought this up is what you were saying, rather than what this cyber challenge is going for is not even just defined where vulnerabilities may be, but to also fix them without modifying in any bad way, counter way, the business logic.
I thought you were doing some magic there for a second.
Well, yes, modifying the code, but it's not creating bad code that is changing the business logic. Sorry, that's the word I'm looking for, the phrase I'm looking for, of the original software. And it's going for C and C++, usual suspects there, but Java, Rust, Go, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Ruby, and PHP. So a lot of very common web-related languages too. So this is not just a pure memory safety area. So I thought this was pretty neat. And it's probably all the time I have to talk about that one. So I don't want to take time.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep it short. But you started getting me daydreaming there on that. Like, I wonder if there's some startup has reached out to me recently. I know they listen. So hey, and they've got a way to fix what? Something happened in the background. I clicked on something. Sorry. They've got some way to fix source code, right? Pull requests and that type of thing. I don't know the details, but I've taught them twice in this episode today, and this is one of the thoughts. But it got me daydreaming of like, hey, could you take that concept of like machine learning goes, sees problem, issues pull request, fix, done, better, and maybe take a step back and go, hey, this particular function or this particular file, I'm seeing X percentage of issues compared to your other sources. It's in the top 5th percentile. I'm going to go ahead and understand the algorithm it's doing and rewrite it in Rust. Does that scare you?
That one of the notes I'd written about this is, it talks about C and C++, memory safety. Can they find and fix that code? But I would love to see actually an AI that's just rewriting that area of code into Rust, because that's the future we want to go. So I think you were setting me up for this, but that's definitely the future I would love to see, which is actually not part of this challenge, which I thought was kind of interesting.
It sort of scares me, I have to be honest. But I think we'll get there, and maybe in time we'll all get to writing in that language that his tweetness improves, that has no type issues in it. But yeah, I got to keep coming back to that person.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's keep going.
Let's keep going. Well, I think we're just about time to wrap up. So speaking of two other articles I'll mention really quick, I have one from Julia Evans, who is talking about a blog post of, do we think of Git commits as diffs, snapshots, and or histories? And I thought this was just kind of a fun thinking out loud type of blog post about how do you understand what Git is, what Git commits are, and how do you explain them to someone else? And considering we have a podcast, John, where we try to explain concepts, this is a useful type of exercise to learn from. And I just wanted to highlight it too, as it's a great resource for the zine. So those zines cover many other things beyond just Git, command lines, a couple protocols. It's a bunch of really great resources. And maybe that's the one where I'll leave us
really
today.
Briefly on this. When I saw this and I started reading it, I got a little worried. I'm like, damn it, do I know how Git actually does this? And from the point of view of as someone who's been around the streets a few times, the streets of AppSec, I have a pretty good understanding of how most of the core Unix utilities work. In some of my college classes, I actually wrote those from scratch, not for that exists now, but I've had college software development assignments like write cat or write tail or write NC or a lot of these things. So I have a very intimate understanding of how these things work, a lot of them. And for most tools I use day to day, I've got a pretty good, as alluding to a future podcast, I have read the man pages on many of these. But I don't think I could tell you how Linus has it storing that format internally. So I think it's diff, but I just don't know. And it's that moment of oh no, I don't know. But then the question is, do I need to know? Probably not. But Git is one of those things which is probably a good little bit of homework for all our listeners. It's it's one of those things which seems so simple until things go wrong. And then you realize how many commands are in there and like how flexible this thing is. And yeah, it's a good but scary thing.
Exactly. Is this a Git command, or is it a horror movie title? That's my approach to trying to figure things out when things go wrong. But I think that's a great note to end it on. And so I want to say, just once again, repeat Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you again, John, for walking us through the first segment of what the new year is going to hopefully look like for us, and hopefully AppSec improves, as well as walking through some of this news to see whether AppSec is improving or not already in January. So thanks everyone for listening. Please do send us feedback. There's a lot of areas we'd love to hear about, a couple seeds that we hope we've jogged your memories. So please do subscribe as well. Give us a like. Do check out the show notes. And speaking of the streets of AppSec, check out Cyan Skyway from Mitch Murder. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.